Ladies and gentlemen, in various parts of the Amhara region, a fierce conflict is unfolding between the Ethiopian National Defense Force, ENDF, and the Amhara Fano Force. This video aims to provide you with the latest updates on this ongoing situation. A recent video we've obtained captures residents of Addis Ababa rallying for Amhara Fano to assume control of the city. Their resounding chant, "Fano is coming, Fano is coming," will be shared with you towards the end of this presentation. Since the commencement of the Fano uprising, there has been a notable challenge to the authority and actions of the boy king, whose godlike omnipotence and malevolence have faced successful opposition. Consequently, the policies of Oromumma, marked by mass evictions and murders as part of ethnic cleansing, have experienced a significant decline. While there are positive developments, there is a lingering concern that Oromumma's cult-like theology might revive its historical pattern of bloodletting from the 16th century if the momentum of the Fano movement is halted either voluntarily or by external force. A detailed examination of the current realities brings to light underlying issues that both the government and the Fano movement must confront. The government needs to acknowledge that impeding or slowing down Fano's military advances does not equate to a true military victory or a comprehensive political solution to the crisis. Furthermore, the deployment of drones and other military measures against Fano fighters and civilian targets is unlikely to bring the Fano enterprise to its knees. On the contrary, such actions may galvanize the populace, even those who were previously reluctant, drawing them into the theater of war. Another stark reality for the government is the erosion of trust in the boy king, a consequence of his betrayal, habitual lying, and a notable lack of human empathy. Any attempt at a negotiated peace accord that fails to consider these three factors amounts to a unilateral surrender. On the Fano side, there are two fundamental points that must be acknowledged. Firstly, possessing a morally, legally, and politically justified cause for an armed uprising does not guarantee a political victory. Secondly, while military strength is a necessary condition for political victory, it is not a sufficient one. Fano needs to recognize that the absence of an inclusive political architecture, coupled with a robust political strategy and a viable endgame supported by a flexible roadmap, undermines its military advances. In essence, the ongoing war between the government and Fano paints a grim picture characterized by a stark misalignment between desired outcomes and the harsh realities on the ground. The government's war lacks coherent military strategy and logic, being primarily driven by a narcissistic boy king who places unwarranted trust in fraudulent evangelist prophets, assuring him of divine victory over Fano. Unbeknownst to him, this approach is plunging the nation into a destructive and seemingly endless war. Conversely, the somber reality on the Fano front is that its military offensive seems to have reached a standstill or at the very least lost its initial momentum. This stagnation can be attributed to the fact that the military uprising is taking place in a political vacuum. The hermetized Amhara intellectual class has failed to produce political icons and opinion leaders from its ranks. Regrettably, the void in political leadership is filled by a mix of singing and dancing, with revered heroes and comical sidekicks. In simple terms, the war is unfolding between a government entranced in a cult-like trance, sleepwalking into an endless war, and an Amhara uprising lacking the political acumen and theological foundation required to realize its full potential for a definitive political victory. The consequence of a prolonged war between these forces is devastating for the nation. Fano must come to the realization that dragging a high-intensity war indefinitely poses an existential threat to the Amhara tribal land in terms of humanitarian suffering and economic destruction. The worst mistake Fano could make is overestimating its power to march into Addis Ababa and underestimating the need for a robust political strategy. Fano is susceptible to falling prey to such miscalculations if it allows extremist forces to exert influence on its movement. The dynamic interaction of such a reality, coupled with the presence of a reckless juvenile king, is highly likely to degenerate into a destructive state of entropic chaos, from which neither the government nor the Fano enterprise can emerge as a strategic winner. The boy king cannot be expected to submit to reason, logic, or justice, and the responsibility of breaking free from this spiraling crisis rests on the shoulders of Fano. Successfully carrying this burden requires building strength and compelling the boy king to submit to reason. In this regard, Fano's success hinges on its ability to fend off political extremists both within and outside of its enterprise. The sooner it repels such characters, the sooner it will achieve its full potential. As emphasized in several articles, this necessitates reining in the highly charged and combustible emotional state that feeds upon extremism and, in turn, serves as a steroid to fuel the conflict. Fano faces unpopular and challenging decisions on how to handle political appendages that could lead to its downfall. Failure to address these issues plays into the hands of the boy king, extending his stay in office beyond its natural biopolitical life. The primary objective of this article is to guide Fano's political and military spheres into alignment and provide a pathway for a strategic political and military victory. The fundamental question arises: what does political and military victory entail in terms of changing the existing status quo? The Fano enterprise needs to define its strategic political and military end goals. Does it seek a change of government involving the removal of the Oromo PP-led political leadership? If so, what steps are involved in this process? Is unseating the Prime Minister sufficient, or does it necessitate dissolving the Parliament and overhauling the Constitution? Alternatively, would a change of governance without necessarily changing the government be acceptable? In this scenario, institutional forces would build robust political power bases to assert democratic rights and curtail the boy king's unchecked power. Regardless of the chosen end goal, certain guardrails must be established to prevent the descent into civil war or prolonged conflict. These questions go beyond abstract legal or political considerations. They are strategic inquiries that directly impact Fano's chances of achieving its goal of eradicating Oromumara's influence from the nation's political landscape. In defining its end goal, Fano must be mindful that it has a legitimate right to defend itself and determine the governance of the Amhara tribal land. However, it lacks the legitimate authority to unilaterally decide the constitutional and institutional nature of the nation's governance architecture. It is imperative for the Fano enterprise to pause, reflect, retrospect, and make mid-course corrections where needed to align its political end goal and military means. Such a pivot is an absolute necessity to counteract the diminishing likelihood of success and steer its trajectory toward the strategic political goal. Why is this pivot an absolute necessity? There exists a disparity in the forces at play between the government and Fano. The government holds a substantial advantage in firepower, including advanced weapons such as drones, missiles, and tanks. In contrast, Fano's power lies in the people. This means its primary power base depends on political support not only within its tribal land, but also beyond, both locally and internationally. Military operations cannot exist in a political vacuum. Only a naive perspective would argue that Fano's political objective and strategy are well known and well developed. The slogan, Manashashin Amara Madarashashin Teofeya, Our destiny, Amhara, our destination, Ethiopia, might be a clever slogan fit for a bumper sticker, but it cannot substitute for a strategic political manifesto. A careful examination of the situation reveals a mismatch between Fano's military and political parameters. While Fano's military wing has achieved remarkable milestones in a short period, its political challenges stem from two critical factors. Firstly, extremist forces led by Shalika Dawit and certain diaspora groups pose serious threats. Secondly, the Amhara intellectual class has failed to devise a robust political strategy that could simultaneously serve as leverage for Fano's military endeavors and use Fano's military success as leverage for its political end goal. The failure of the intellectual class can be attributed to two sources. Firstly, there is a fear of facing ad hominem attacks from extremist groups aligned with Shalika Dawit's clan. The intellectual class appears reluctant to engage in direct confrontations, given the power of these groups to silence dissent through verbal attacks. The Amhara and Ethiopianist intellectual colony has organized conferences on relatively safe topics, such as making Ge'ez an African language, the need to overhaul the constitution, and the systemic falsification of Ethiopia's history. While these topics are less likely to provoke the wrath of certain groups, they sidestep the most critical issues of the day. Recent discussions on a global forum even touched on the seemingly trivial issue of Ethiopian donkeys. A member urged everyone to stand against the slaughter of donkeys for export, emphasizing the need for ethical practices respecting economic needs, cultural heritage, and religious values. While this issue may have its merits, it pales in comparison to the pressing matters Ethiopia faces today. The apparent disconnect between these discussions and the urgent issues of the day highlights the disparity between Fano's military advancements and its political space. The intellectual class seems hesitant to address critical issues out of fear of ad hominem attacks by extremist groups. To further illustrate this point, a prominent member of the forum responded to the donkey discussion, linking the mistreatment of donkeys to human rights violations and urging the exercise of democratic values, beginning with the humane treatment of these animals. The humorous tone in discussing such seemingly irrelevant topics reveals the reluctance of Ethiopian intellectuals to tackle pressing issues. This avoidance strategy shields them from potential attacks, but fails to address the root causes of Ethiopia's challenges. The disconnect between Fano's military achievements and its political parameters is evident, with discussions ranging from donkey democracy to other seemingly safe topics. To jumpstart Fano's momentum, it is crucial for Fano to recognize its role as the last hope for Ethiopia, tasked with eliminating the threat posed by Oromoma and laying the groundwork for transformative change. However, this necessitates an elevation of its political game, liberating its intellectual community from the constraints of a hermetized cultural theology and taking a stand against extremist elements. There is no alternative. Fano must lead discussions and conferences away from the safety of donkey politics to the challenging terrain of human rights politics, free from fear or favor.
Addis Ababa.